Hey everyone, welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. Got a really great guest on today. He's an American writer, graphic designer, and illustrator. He works through his design studio, 344 Design. He was born in Germany in 1973, and he moved to California to attend Art Center after that. Please join me in welcoming Stefan G. Butcher. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Are you ready for 20 questions?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, question one. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
Well, these days I'm mostly a book designer, but you would have seen my work on album covers, movie theaters, on the sides of buildings. I've designed for David Hockney and Philip Glass for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I designed a Yeti for Saks Fifth Avenue. I've written and designed 7 books on everything from graphic design and illustration to self-improvement, and created the origin story for a Yeti.
Great. And just a note for the audience, if you guys are interested in the book-centric episodes, definitely check out the episode with Stephen Heller. It was a great one.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
question two, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
that project that you're working on, I know exactly what that should look like. I think just my uh ludicrous feeling of certainty about what I think things should look like. And there may be, there usually is a process of negotiation and me also learning from the responses and responding to the responses. But I sort of go through the world and go, oh, well, this should look this way. Oh, well, that should be chartreuse though. And so I think I don't know that everybody has that. Maybe they do, but in my experience, that's probably the thing that sets me apart.
Great. And just one more note for the audience, around the book episodes, another great one is Richard Saul Wurman. I think he's approaching 100 books, so crazy numbers there. So number three, why this of all things? Why do you do what you do?
Well, that sort of goes back to my previous answer that I really have a certain amount of fervor around what I want things to look like, and feeling the urge to make of much of that a reality as I possibly can. So when I first started doing ads, I started out kind of in advertising in that I sold ads door to door when I was a kid in Germany. I was like 15, 16 years old.
Mm,
And I would usually just march into stores and go, I saw your ad and I think it's awful. And I've redone it for you.
mm.
Um, that's sort of been the um, the theme, certainly, of the first few decades of my career. These days, I usually wait for people to ask me to help instead of just foisting myself on people.
Great. So number four, some people struggle with, but the question is, what does your future look like?
Yeah, I struggle with that with that one also, because I mean at this point, what does all of our future look like? We're having this conversation a day after the end of the current American Supreme Court session, where everything has changed pretty fundamentally, and it seems pretty grim. And in that context, I think it's super important, more important than ever, maybe, to pursue beauty and poetry in the world.
Mm,
And I think the people who are dedicating themselves to the raw pursuit of power lack a connection to the transcendent.
mm.
And for me, I think it's maybe the job for all of us that do have that connection to make things that make that transcendence impossible to ignore. So I think to the degree that I can see my future, it would be to just create as much beauty as I possibly can do. And that can be through design or illustration. It can be even just in being kind with others and just creating community to whatever degree is possible.
Great, I love that. Number five, we say is unique to this show. The question is, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
Oh, it plays a huge role. I came to California when I just turned 20 to go to school, and I feel so firmly rooted to this particular slice of the world,
Mm.
and it is reflected in everything that I do. I was a very much a square peg in a round hole in back in Germany, and which is and Germany is sort of outwardly very liberal, but on the street level is very conformist and very, like don't make yourself really visible, or don't, sort of don't deviate in any way. So the minute I got off the plane in California, I was like, oh, right, well, this makes sense.
Mm.
And as I'm talking to you, I'm looking out at um, a lot of California native plants with tons of butterflies dancing around. There's hummingbirds going around. There's hawks going up above, and it's just this gorgeous piece of the world. And I think that's seeped deep into my being, and then that comes out in the way I work and the way I create and just the way I do everything. So it has an absolutely foundational and fundamental impact on how I am and how I work.
Great, so let's shift gears a bit. If you had to start from the beginning, what advice would you give your former younger self?
Always prioritize love. Always have the courage to tell people you love that you love them. Tell them over and over until it gets embarrassing. Um, and work is important, and certainly work on your skills. Um, but I used to be a huge workaholic, and I used to hustle like crazy and not sleep for days on end. And in the end, if I've regretted anything, it's not taking more time to be with the people that mean something to me. So that would be my advice. It would probably just also w- get the skills you want, but then don't worry so much about, where's the next job going to come from, or am I going to get big enough with what I'm doing, or all that stuff sort of falls away. At the end of the day, it's always just how much can I connect with other people?
Great, and what's a day in your life like?
Music, design, and nature. Um, a lot of my time now is devoted to learning music because it's a really interesting puzzle. And what I've learned over the years is, like, I like to connect with people and I like to solve puzzles. And a lot of the puzzles used to be all design based, and these days a lot of it is learning music and learning music theory and all that kind of stuff. And then also just being out and about. So I usually, you know, I I'm a night owl, so I usually get up reasonably late, have myself a cup of cocoa, practice my scales, practice my technique, do a little bit of work, practice some more, do a little bit more work. I walk 5.5 miles every day so that my body doesn't get neglected. And then I rinse and repeat.
Great, and eight is around lifelong learning. It's a popular topic. How do you stay up to date?
Music. That's I'm always learning. I mean, that's sort of the theme of my life, is that I'm forever a student. And again, these days mostly it's learning music. But what I found is that what I learn in one area always evolves my thinking in all the other areas. So when I talk to my therapist, for example, there's a lot of stuff that I understand by saying, oh, it's like that when I learned that thing on the guitar, or I learned that thing on piano or something. But applied to my life or to people, and with design, it's always been that way, where I go, oh, yeah, yeah, it's like that recording of that album in 1973. And I'll just apply that to typography. Or again, like it'll be, oh, I can take this thing that I learned in therapy and I can put that into this book design or into this movie title or something like that. So I'm constantly learning. But it's not that I'm going, okay, I have a sort of a regimented approach to I'm going to stay up to date with software or I'm going to stay up to date with this latest plugin or something like that. Like that stuff's kind of boring to me. That just I'll grab what I need to when I need it. Um, my learning is much more focused on how can I see things differently and how can I think about things differently so that different ideas come out on the other end.
Nice. And 9 is about tools. Can you talk about digital and analog tools?
Yeah, when we talked about this beforehand, you mentioned, you asked if I was a digital nomad, and I'm kind of the opposite of that. I very much need my very specific desk with my very specific keyboard, my very specific mouse, and my very, like everything needs to be just so.
Mm,
Um, for me to just be comfortable because I don't want to think about any of that. I mean, I can work anywhere and I can do all that stuff, but I also, and same with I have the pens I like and I have them in a cup that I like. It's all sort of built out so that it feels completely natural and it doesn't impede my thinking in any way.
mm,
On the whole, I then also like all tools though. So I'm not certainly not exclusively digital, but at the same time, I'm also not exclusively analog. So there isn't like, oh, I only use there. I saw this whole discourse about that $40 pencil, the something wing dark wing pencil or something like that. And people were like, oh my God, the quality of the graphite. That's great, but I'm not a fetishist that way. Like
mm,
you can hand me anything and I'll make something out of it. But that said, I do obviously have my favorites and just sort of and mostly it's more like location. Like if my hand reaches out, is the thing that I want where I think it should be.
mm. Great. And halfway number 10, how do you deal with work-life balance?
Well, I mean, as I mentioned, I used to be a huge workaholic and I made a ton of mistakes, just really working too much and thinking that that somehow made me more valuable or more worthy as a designer or an artist by just because I always and it was basically a manifestation of imposter syndrome, right? Where my thinking was, I'm not as good as other people, I'm not as smart or as creative as other people, but I can outwork them, and that's how I'm going to compensate.
Mm,
And just, ground myself down to a nub and neglected people that loved me and neglected people that I loved right back because I was just too scared to stop because I thought that once I stopped, I would never be able to start up again.
mm,
And then about 6 years ago, I really crashed hard. And I did stop because I was like, oh, this is no longer serving me. And the thing is, I wasn't able to start back up again, not in the way that I had been working. And the surprising thing to me was that it wasn't necessary to go back to the thing that I was doing previously by just being a little looser and a little gentler in my thinking. I was able to do much better work in a way that was much more fun to do for me and for the people I was working with. So, um, I think these days I strive for gentleness. And I really, when I work with people and I work on my own projects, a lot of my thinking goes to how can I build a process that lets there be creativity and beauty, but in a way that doesn't hurt me or hurt the people I'm working with or that are in my life.
Great. And 11, if you weren't doing what you do now, what might you be doing?
That's a really scary question, and I really struggle with that. especially because the world right now feels so unstable and philosophically inhospitable. So I really don't have the answer for it, but whatever it is, I hope that I won't have to do it alone.
Mm. What would you not like to do with your career?
Uh, I wouldn't want to do anything that inflicts harm because it's a hard world and I don't want to make this life harder for anyone. And so I think as long as I can do things that bring joy to people or that bring a little bit of calm and peace to people, then I think that's what I'd like to do. And I would like to avoid the opposite of that.
How about a favorite word, quote, or sentence?
There's a business advisor, Blair Enns from Pitching Without Pitching. Uh, is it? Yeah, no, Win Without Pitching, sorry. And he said this thing in a seminar that I did with him, don't be afraid of information. And it was about, asking questions about the scope of a job and stuff like that. But that really stuck with me. And I find applications for that anywhere and everywhere. Um, because as I'm looking at life, things get screwed up when we're afraid of asking or answering the question we actually want answered. So I try to have the courage to ask about the stuff that I really want to know. And I also really strive for the courage to answer the questions that are asked of me honestly, even if it risks some sort of rupture that then has to either be repaired or accepted and acknowledged.
Nice. And a least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Man up. Hate that. Toxic masculinity has sort of shaped our world for the last 50,000 years. And I think a huge reason why the world is the way it is right now is because um, men have been taught to ignore their feelings and to, present this sort of alpha bullshit version of themselves. And I think it just makes everything worse. So yeah, I hate that phrase.
You're choosing one word to describe yourself. What word do you choose?
Mensch.
What keeps you up at
And for
night?
the listeners that aren't familiar with Yiddish, um, it's just to be in touch with or as I understand it, to be in touch with your humanity and to have a sense of humor about the absurdity of life and play, I'm this may be a super reductive definition, but that's that's how I understand it. And if I got it wrong, please let me know.
Great. And 16, what keeps you up at night?
I worry a lot about how we get from here to the Star Trek future, where everyone can live with fundamental dignity and joy.
Mm,
And my worry is how we get there without having to pass through some sort of portal of violence or natural disaster.
mm.
Um, yeah, so I think about that a lot.
How about a dream you're chasing?
Well, on a larger scale, I'd like to find pockets of happiness that I can share with others and how to expand those pockets to encompass more people. And on a personal level, I just like to play music with the same degree of ease as I'm talking to you right now.
What inspires you?
Always music. Um, when things get cloudy and stormy in my head, that's the thing that reminds me of joy and connection, like when I can't find it any other way. And it gives me an emotion that I can aspire to. And if in this lifetime I can ever create a piece of design that has that level of emotional resonance,
Mm.
then I think I then I'll probably just faint from joy.
And last couple here, any advice you'd like to share?
Be kind. Be kind to people. And I'm not talking about holding open doors or helping someone, move, which is all nice and you should definitely do, and I definitely would do and do. But I think I'm talking about giving people your time sincerely and being present and listening to what they are telling you and what they need to share to get it off their chest, and pay attention to what makes them happy and give them that. Like, actually, there's like gift giving is a good example. Like, sometimes you get people that give you gifts where you go, why did you think I would like that? Because sometimes they just want to make sort of a showy gesture. And I think kindness to me is to go, like, one of the things that I love to do is like, oh, you mentioned that thing like 5 months ago. And so I immediately went out and got that, and here it is. So like, just put joy out into the world. And my biggest regrets all come from being unkind, from being impatient, from letting my fear taint my interaction with people, because just, like, oh, I wonder how they see me, or I wonder if I'm establishing myself enough. All that stuff is just noise. Like, at the end of the day, just having a generosity of spirit and being there for other people, and also being vulnerable with them and with yourself, even with your own feelings. I think that to me is the most important thing to focus on. So that would be my advice.
Great. And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you and what's our call to action?
Oh, the best place to keep track of what I'm doing is probably on my site, 344 Loves You. So it's 344lovesyou.com. Right now, I'm also posting daily monster drawings on TikTok, where I take a lot of ink, as I've done for the last 18 years, it turns out, and I make a character out of that. Um, the call to action is breathe, eat sandwiches, and find as much joy in your day as you possibly can.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining today. We kicked off today's episode talking about books, and it's a trend, the importance of the book and the importance to get into books more quickly. So I'm glad we had that start. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.